Run the floor. We opened the show this morning with thrilling finishes in the NBA. Game 7, OKC and Houston. James Harden, who had a terrible night offensively, makes the huge block at the end on Lou Dort, who was shooting what would have been a game-winning three. Rockets hang on to win. They play the Lakers in Game 1 starting tomorrow. Heat, meanwhile, take a 2-0 lead in their series against the Bucks. Giannis called for a foul on that play with no time remaining. Jimmy Butler made free throws. Again, this first one was all that he needed. Again, no time left on the clock. And the Heat take a 2-0 series lead. Meanwhile, we have another lead-worthy story today, and we'll set it up with this. Sneaky Hembo, and this one is for Damian Woody. Who is the highest drafted running back, D. Wood, that ever played with Tom Brady?
I'm going to go with Corey Dillon.
Corey Dillon's not a bad guess. It's not the answer. The answer is Fred Taylor. Remember that? Fred Taylor played with the Patriots. He was the 9th overall pick. He has now been surpassed because here we go. Leonard Fournette is a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, the number 4 pick in the 2017 draft. The running back agrees in principle on a 1-year deal with the Bucs. He confirmed it himself on social media last night. His 1-year deal is worth $3.5 million with incentives. And I mentioned he put it on there. Let's take a look. This was Leonard Fournette on Twitter, the hashtag #GoBucks, giving everyone a first look at him in his new uniform. On any other day, this would have been our first story because this feels like an enormous acquisition for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we have D. Wood, and we have Mike Tannenbaum, and Shefty is with us, getting up early this morning. Shefty, let's start with you. How did this happen?
Basically, Greeny, from the time he cleared waivers, there were a few teams that were in touch with Leonard Fournette. Out in front was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The New England Patriots also made a couple of calls to Leonard Fournette to see if he'd have any interest in going to Foxborough. But ultimately, Tampa Bay decided that it needed and wanted another running back to complement its stable of backs. And it pursued Leonard Fournette, and it certainly sounds like he wanted to go there, stay in the state of Florida. And there was a real push here from ownership in Tampa to go get this deal done. And they did last night. Agreement in principle, a $2 million base salary worth up to $3.5 million in incentives. And now they have another running back to add in to Ronald Jones, who I can't imagine is overly thrilled about the arrival of Leonard Fournette and some of the other running backs they have in Tampa, like Shady McCoy.
Yeah, so they have huge names there, and obviously this is a big acquisition. And let's just take a moment to appreciate the delicious irony of New England trying to sign him and him choosing to go with Brady and Gronk and company in Tampa. D. Wood, how much of a difference do you expect this player to make for this team this season?
Well, I don't think Leonard Fournette puts him over the top, but I mean, he's clearly the most talented running back on that roster. I think he brings an element of physicality that they don't have at the running back position. I mean, you look at Leonard Fournette, he's a physically imposing player, a guy that's improved in the passing game. He had he had the most catches of his career last year with 76, so he can bring something in the passing game as well. But Greeny, I think, look, first and foremost, you got to be able to protect Tom Brady in the passing game. But I think where he's going to find his value is those tough yard situations, running between the tackles, because, again, they don't have a guy like that on that roster down in Tampa Bay.
Now, they've got a guy now, and he's hungry and everything else. So Mike Tannenbaum, as one who made your living putting together teams, I look at what the Buccaneers have done this offseason, rebuilding what was already a very explosive offense. How would you describe what they've done and what they have?
Greedy, this has been a transformational offseason, obviously starting with the acquisition of an icon in Tom Brady, but you go right down the list. Rob Gronkowski, Shady McCoy, and then to put the cap on it last night with Leonard Fournette. There's a great axiom in football, which is pass to score and run to win. And they could do both when you think about Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, on and on and on. And now you have 4 good running backs. And let's not forget about Keyshawn Vaughn, a very underrated pass receiving running back who had 66 receptions in college. This is a team that could do it all with an underrated defense, guys that can rush the passer like Pierre-Paul, Shaq Barrett. I see this team getting to the NFC Championship game at a minimum.
So you made a very interesting point this morning when we were in our meeting where we talked about what this could mean for Brady, because football is a sport. We've seen this before. We've seen teams try to put together the quote-unquote dream teams, and it doesn't usually work in football. If Brady pulls this thing off, Mike T., what do you think it means?
Iconic status. This is LeBron James winning a championship with the Miami Heat, and here's why. Football is a sport of repetition, precision, and discipline. You have to throw all that out this year because we had none of it. If Tom Brady could put this team together, put him on his back, and win a championship in these very unusual conditions, he goes into a status of, I guess, maybe Michael Jordan's in that conversation. He's already the greatest of all time. But this brings them to a whole nother level. If they could cobble together a team, never practice, and then roll right into a Super Bowl, it's never been done before, it would never be done again. It truly would be historic.
Yeah, D Wood, pick up on that thought. As far as their ceiling here, you don't see them as a championship team. I feel like the first thing you said wasn't put them over the top. What does it make them?
No, listen, I've said before that Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be one of the contenders in the NFC to go to the Super Bowl. I just don't think Leonard Fournette puts them over the top as being the favorite in the NFC. But I agree with Mike T. Listen, if Tom Brady goes out here and win a Super Bowl, it puts him on another stratosphere. Because, listen, Tom Brady's legacy is already set. He's already the greatest quarterback of all time. Now you have to, if he goes out here and win a Super Bowl, now you got to talk about him along, maybe, is he along the Tiger Woods, the Michael Jordan, that type of level as far as what we talk about in sport.
Sheffy, what are you hearing around the league from what they've done down there? I'm putting together, obviously, beginning with Brady and this team that they've put together. One sense are you getting from people around the NFL about the expectation for them?
Well, I think everybody's excited to see what this team can do, Greeny. And as we're talking about this and bringing up all these examples of dream teams, I think back to the mid-1990s or even before then, when we had the San Francisco 49ers and Dallas Cowboys constantly collecting talent to help them get to and win more Super Bowls. And then I think, again, in more recent times, to a team like the Eagles that put together a dream team, the Cleveland Browns last year we were talking about them the way we're talking about the Buccaneers. The difference is the Buccaneers have Tom Brady. I want to add one other thing, Greeny, just in this morning. We now have some clarity as to why New England pursued Leonard Fournette. Mike Reese, a great reporter for ESPN Boston, is reporting this morning that Damian Harris, the Patriots running back, has a hand injury, and he could miss some time to start the season.
Okay, very good. Outstanding. Guys, we'll leave it there for the moment. Much more NFL to come, but to me that is a huge acquisition. Leonard Fournette to the Buccaneers with Tom Brady. Meanwhile, it was just a few short weeks ago when the Big Ten and Pac-12 made their decisions to postpone all fall sports. Now, as the rest of the Power Five prepares for opening kickoff, it is the brother of a prominent Big Ten coach that is voicing his opinion. Here's the Ravens' John Harbaugh.
Free the Big Ten. Let's go. Let's go play some football. Let's get Michigan and Ohio State and all those great teams playing some football out there. Michigan had 0 positive tests in August. And for anybody that wants to opt out, they can. They can. Their families should have that choice, just like the Southeast Conference gave the players and families in the Southeast Conference that choice, and most of them, as you know, decided to play as a family. So I think the Big Ten players and families should have that same choice. So I'm on record. There you go. You got it. Free the Big Ten.
Free the Big Ten, says an NFL coach. Heather and Paul and Mike T is here. Paul, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you've got the President of the United States putting them on the 1 yard line, and you got NFL coaches saying free the Big Ten. Think about that. What's the opposite of free? What can you imagine what is going on? How would you put this into perspective?
This might be the first time in my life I've ever agreed with a Harbaugh. I think that was fantastic. I mean, it was. That's what you want from a brother, and he's right, and that's why this story becomes so confusing and disillusioning. And I realize, Greeny, we all realize why the Big Ten seemed to go the direction it did. It just went too early, and I know I say that every time we have this conversation, but at some point the Big Ten needs to give us a roadmap other than we had an 11-3 vote and we're not returning immediately because college football is starting. I mean, there are games tonight, and there are high school games in Ohio. There are going to be college games in Ohio. There's going to be NFL games in Ohio, but the best team in Ohio, the most famous team in the Big Ten, is not going to play, and nobody has been able to explain why not, other than we shut down on August 11th.
Yeah, and again, the pressure is just remarkable. Heather, what are you hearing from people inside there?
Well, Greeny, a Big Ten head coach texted me last night and echoed those sentiments, saying all coaches in the Big Ten want to play, and we are doing everything we can to get our teams back on the field as soon as possible. But it's a stark difference in terms of the coaches' mentality between the Big Ten and the Pac-12, which, as you know, also isn't playing. I talked to USC coach Clay Helton earlier this week, and he told me you have to be able to look at it through a father's eyes and say, you know what? This may not be the right time right now to do what we love. He said you have to respect the information and the decision that comes along with it.
That's an extraordinarily good point. I had David Shaw on my radio show, the coach of Stanford. He told me the reaction of his players was one of gratitude when they called off the season. Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, they're literally suing. People in the Nebraska kids are suing the Big Ten Conference. That's quite a juxtaposition. Mike T., you made an interesting point this morning. You know Kevin Warren, who's the commissioner of the Big Ten. I don't know what he was expecting, but obviously it hasn't gone the way he was expecting. What do you think of this whole thing?
Yeah, Greeny, when he made the decision, I'm sure he was assuming that when he looked to his left and he looked to his right, the Big 12, the ACC, and most importantly, SEC was going to walk shoulder to shoulder with him. And when he took a step forward and they didn't, now they're panicking. And here's where the pressure point is specifically. Everybody's really worried about this year, and obviously we should be. However, when you talk to the player personnel directors of all these schools, it's about recruiting. And just to be specific, when you think of about Jeff Hafley, he left Ohio State. He's establishing himself at Boston College. Mac Brown at North Carolina. They have tremendous opportunities to close the gap with the Big Ten schools in terms of recruiting if the Big Ten winds up not playing. So I think for Kevin Warren, I think he assumed that those conferences were going to be with him. And now that they're not, the pressure is bubbling up from the football programs, not just because of this year, but they are getting eviscerated in terms of recruiting for next year and the year after.
Yeah, Heather, let's go back. We were talking so much in the lead up to this about the conferences wanting to be together as much as they could. They kept having these meetings of the commissioners, and now they act and the others don't. Where does that all fit into this equation?
Well, college football, Greeny, is probably more fragmented than it has ever been. And American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Oresco and I talked about that. And he says that he wishes it weren't that way. And, you know, usually they are all in lockstep and talking. And it's just that has simply changed. And they are doing what's best for their own conferences. But Greg Sankey in the SEC, John Swofford, and Bob Bowlesby, they are still going forward pretty much together.
Paul, final word.
Yeah, well, Kevin Warren did this to himself because back in July, Greeny, he had a Zoom meeting in the morning with the other 4 Power 5 commissioners, and without telling them, he went out that day and announced that he was going conference only, and it was never the same after that. So he has no one to blame but himself. He made this decision. I don't. If he expected the rest of the college football to come with him, then he is in for a long tenure as that commissioner because that was a stupid mistake. And he was naive, and I think he is all of those right now.
All right, again, we will continue to follow this. Just remarkable. Meanwhile, let me get up and go around the rest of the world of sports on what is one of the busiest sports days of the year. In college, Jamie Newman, the expected starting quarterback for Georgia, has opted out of the season over COVID concerns and to prepare for next year's draft. He came to Georgia as a graduate transfer from Wake Forest in January. Meanwhile, in the NFL, Washington, Ron Rivera announces Dwayne Haskins will be the team's starting quarterback week 1 against the Eagles. He threw for 1,365 yards and 7 touchdowns in his rookie year last year. Baseball, Yankees closer Aroldis Chapman, manager Aaron Boone, and Rays manager Kevin Cash were all suspended following a benches clearing incident Tuesday night. Happened after Chapman threw a 101-mile-an-hour fastball right over Mike Brasso's head. No incidents in the game last night, by the way, and the Rays wound up winning. And then top seed Novak Djokovic has advanced to the 3rd round of the U.S.